4 scripts. So you can prepare as much as you want to for those 4 leading up. Certainly, and doing 12 episodes or 24 episodes didn't seem to matter. As it gets towards the end, you get the scripts later, and you start learning stuff the night before. You know, it is what it is, because that's when you get it.
And sometimes that's a daunting task. You've got 6-7 pages to learn. It's a lot.
Well, and certainly if you're shooting episodes 9 and 10, and they're going well, you're panicked to read 11 and 12. So you put that off as long as possible, which is kind of my problem. But you figure it out. The nice thing about, and it's funny because this is the thing that I've had to talk to other actors about. We were trained, and certainly when I started working in the early 80s, television that was the end of your career. If you were doing television, that was the last stop Texaco, and the next thing else was commercials, and then you were dead. You were doing Chekhov in Poughkeepsie. And the fear of television was playing a character over a long period of time. But 24 was part of it, but I think ER, there were some other fantastic shows certainly before us. Sopranos was a perfect example, where if you take a look at Tony Soprano's character from the very beginning of that show to what it evolved to at the end of that show, the character was vastly different. And I think Jack Bauer was the same, and so I tried to explain to other actors, no, you got to try this is amazing. You get to develop a character over X number of years, and the character doesn't stay the same. The character changes, and if you look at Jack Bauer from the very first episode to the very last episode, they're very 2 different men. It's actually one of the greatest, one of the most rewarding acting opportunities that you could imagine. And so my experience in television was extraordinary for that. And I have to tell you, as you know, I'm a huge movie fan. And I go to less and less films. When I take a look at a show like Ray Donovan, which I think is unbelievable, or Boardwalk Empire, or Game of Thrones. There's just so much great stuff out there. It was just an honor to be able to have been a part of kind of that transition.
So now you're on set. So now you've memorized it, you're ready to go, and we get on set. And 24, again, I think is a little different than most shows. I do a lot of other shows. Especially, I think the writers gave us probably more freedom than they would most shows. We get on set, we work it out, we read it, and we sort of block it out. Blocking is when you just sort of, for those that don't know, you decide where all the characters are going to stand, where the cameras are going to be. But then we make adjustments. For example, one that I know that people would love to hear about is, how did you end up throwing the Red Queen from Game of Thrones out the window? That wasn't the original concept. There was a slightly different concept, and it's something that we talked about, and you find something else. And the writers were always great. Howard and guys were great to letting us sort of, play that way.
But in the end, it was my ego. I was an unbelievable actor. And as it was written, I come through the window and shoot her and kill her. And I looked at Joe and I went, I don't get to have a scene with her, I don't get to talk to her, I don't get to do anything. And I went, no. And as it stands, the episode's too long. So there's all these
other factors.
And I went, no, that's not possible. I have to have a scene with her. She's fantastic. I at least want to be able to say I've worked with her. So we did a few lines. She's the strongest, shortest person you've ever met.
She's wired.
I remember trying to wrestle her on the ground. I said, we can act this. She's going, no. Do it. And so I never actually got to have a scene with her because I spent the entire time just trying to hold her still. She was unbelievably strong. So by the time I actually chucked her out the window, I was quite happy.
You like that?
There's also a character that was the great nemesis for 8 episodes.
Yeah, Michelle.
And to just shoot someone I just didn't think was kind of that. So we said, you know, would you mind if we threw her out the window? I said, oh no, that'd be great. And in all fairness, it's like we added 3 lines.
Yeah.
So it's not really that much of a change. One of the reasons why the scene works so well, and I really do have to pay respect to this, in the UK, we had a stunt crew that was really
great.
the best that I've ever seen. These guys were extraordinary. And I think the reason why it works is because the woman who actually did the jump out the window,
Handcuffed. Backward.
handcuffed
Behind her back.
in her back. They did that so well, and it was such a kind of violent thing that was really the payoff.
And there was another one too. There was the one with Ben Bratt where he puts his hand on the table. That was another one. And he says, what's on the table here? Explain that one too, the way that one worked.
Well, again, it's you know,
It's in the moment.
our writers write fantastic scripts, but every once in a while someone will present you with an opportunity. He put his hand on the table, and I went, okay, well, the scene becomes about him trying to break his hand. And that's been kind of the case over the 8 years. I think when we started, there was one interrogation scene which ended up becoming a torture sequence, which is how we got into this. And again, it's from a dramatic point of view. The opportunity presented itself. The actor that we had in that very first season was on fire. He was great, and he was spitting at me, and he was doing all this other stuff, and it just escalated. And so this scene just kind of grew, and it happened right there. It was very organic. And then every time I say, well, let me pull him over here and burn him. And the other actor was like, yeah, do that. And so it just kind of escalated and it grew. And that's the best way that I can explain my experience on 24 Hours. People came to work and they were excited and they wanted to do something different or bolder, and it kind of shaped how we made the show.
And they gave us the freedom to do it. And I think they gave us the freedom to do it. And I think that's a big part of it, because a lot of it is born on that day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to see, words on a page, but like you say, when you start getting in there and it starts getting physical and you're flipping cables, it all becomes very different.
Well, and it's one of the great things, and I think one of the reasons, I liken our show to a band, and most rock and roll bands break up, and some stay together for whatever reasons. We stayed together because everybody respected what everybody did. The writers were on the 2nd floor, and we were on what we call the floor, and that's where we shot. We didn't go up there, and we didn't go up there and tell them what to write, and they didn't come down and tell us how to shoot. The writers wrote, the directors directed, the actors acted. Everybody did their jobs, and I think there was a great mutual respect across the board for everybody involved that allowed us to stay together. And I know Howard's up there somewhere and representing the writers. No, that freedom was extraordinary, and the faith that we had in each other was really important as well.
One of the secrets, I think. So 13 years, Jack. Now, how much of Jack is in Kiefer and vice versa?
Oh, very different.
A couple of things?
Just take a look at my record.
What record was that?
Vastly different. Which is interesting because as a person, I get to look at the character and I can stand back from that character, and it is a very different guy for me. And I promise you, when I grow up, that's the guy I would like to be. But it's very different. But I think the one thing that I respect about him, that I hope that I do have, is that I have a very strong sense of right and wrong. It doesn't mean I necessarily follow it or but I know it. And I think the one beautiful thing about Jack Bauer is that he has a very strong sense of right and wrong as well, and he lives by it. And that's the thing I've respected about the character more than anything. And that was the great fear of opening it up to do a season 9, all of those things. I have a great respect for that character, and it makes the decisions that I have to make as an actor very simple, because that moral compass of his is his code of life. And so everything becomes very simple for me in that context.
What about people looking at you sometimes and sort of thinking of you as Jack Bauer? I know you told me a story, and it's just a great story about running out of gas and someone poking your head off.
This was so embarrassing. In the first season, I had gone to the wrong location. I had gone to a set. I had gotten the maps confused. And we had a company move. And I went to the wrong location first. And then to make matters worse, on the way to the second location, now already late. And I'm never late. I've never missed a day's work, and I've never really been late except for this one time. And in all fairness, I arrived at the first location
On time.
But to make matters worse, I ran out of gas literally half a mile down the road. And we had been shooting in this area, and it was the first season. We'd been shooting in this area for about 4 months. And I am still wearing a suit from Jay Leno the night before. And so I'm in a suit at 8 o'clock in the morning, running with a jerry can on the way to a gas station. And the traffic in Los Angeles is really horrific, so no one's moving. And someone yells out, Jack Bauer! Because they think we're shooting a scene. And 4 minutes later, his car hasn't moved. I'm running back with a jerry can full of gas. He's like, Jack Bauer's a loser.
He tried to save someone once. The little lady being beat up.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, this is an awful story. I was driving down the street, and for those of you who are from Los Angeles, it was on Olympic, and there's not a grocery store for miles, and there's this old woman carrying groceries, and I'm like, oh my God, how far has she walked? And literally at that moment, 2 guys accost her and steal her purse. So I jump out of the car, I grab one kid and I hit him. I grab the other kid and he goes, no. And I hear all these other kids screaming from across the street, and they're making a student film. The show, don't try this at home.
There was no clue when someone said cut.
No, there was the old lady came to me, and I went to grab her, and I thought, wow, you're strong. 18-year-old kid from USC.
All right, I'm out of questions. You guys have any questions for Mr. Kiefer Sutherland? There's a microphone right in the middle here. And I'm sure you do. Here we go.
Testing. Okay. Hello, Keith. Thank you for coming by. And classic question. If you could walk the ground floor on the dealer's room, who would you dress up as? With a mask, or what would you wear?
Who would you dress up as if you had to wear a costume to Comic-Con?
Well, The first instinct is just a stormtrooper. No one would know who you are, and your body is defined.
Guys, that was a bit of a hint. If there's a stormtrooper out there, go up to him and say, "Are you Jack Bauer?" Every stormtrooper is going to get attacked from here on out. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mike. I want to know when you have family reunions, you're having at Thanksgiving, do you and your dad have arguments over whose character is more badass?
First of all, that's a wonderful question. We don't seem to ever talk about work, which is very odd. And we just made a movie together, which John directed, a Western. And even in the context of making that film, we didn't really talk about work very much. It's almost like an odd family rule. You don't bring the business to the table. But I can kick his ass.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Julian. Mr. Sutherland, given your recent work on Metal Gear Solid 5, what has been the similarities and differences of working on a video game as opposed to a television show or a movie?
Well, I was about to say there's nothing similar because they're vastly different. Except the origin that I maybe take for granted, but the creating of a character would be the one similarity. The technology for something like Metal Gear 5 or Metal Gear Solid is so vastly in front of what we're doing with live action. It's extraordinary, and I do believe that very soon they're going to come together. That films will be interactive, et cetera, et cetera. It's clear that that's where things are moving. So it was an unbelievable opportunity to be a part of this. Technically, when I would go in to do that, they would put 60 little lead pieces on my face, and they would motion capture that with 80 cameras in front of me while I'm doing the voice, just so they can get the facial reaction of that character to move like that. They do the same thing with the body, et cetera, et cetera. But then they have freedom. You know, I think this is, and I know how it's out there, this is a writer's dream. You can get rid of actors completely. We can make them do whatever we want. You know, and it is going that way. The technology is extraordinary. And when you see the game, I think you'll understand it. And this is really, that game specifically has pushed that envelope farther than anything to date. And in 3 years from when it's released, they'll be pushing that envelope again to make it obsolete. So it's going to be very interesting to watch what we have done for the last 10 years come to bear with the technology of what something like Metal Gear is doing, and watch those two things come together. But the process is vastly different. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, I know I speak for everybody when I say it's an honor to have you here.
Oh.
My question is, you talked a bit about the evolution of your character on the show over 8 or 9 seasons. Did you see him as more of a slam-bang action hero that he's become, or did you see him more as a reluctant John McClane type of action hero that he was sort of at the beginning?
Absolutely reluctant. This was a guy who was given a certain set of responsibilities based on his job. In that very first day, he was given a series of circumstances that were seemingly insurmountable, and he did his best with them. He succeeded in others and failed with the most important, which was saving his family. And he lost his wife. The evolution of the character is really